Got to get back to where I need to be. Hi, my name is Deb Wagner, and welcome to the assessments portion and teaching cycle. I picked this picture on the front because it's a cool illustration of the skydivers getting into a geometric pattern, but there's lots of skills that they need to learn prior to being able to do this. This is for advanced jumpers. And not all skydivers would be in the same place as they learn how to skydive. And when we think about our students, we have to keep that in mind. Not everybody's in the same spot, but we all want to get safely to the ground. Um, Howard Gardner in 1994 said the biggest mistake of past centuries in teaching has been to treat all children as if they were variants of the same individual, and thus feeling justified in teaching them the same subjects in the same way. And that truly refers to assessments. Now, we want those common assessments as far as their learning standards, but the assessments they take can be varied to master or demonstrate skills and mastery of those learning targets. Another picture on the side is the teacher saying, to ensure a fair selection, you all get the same test. You must all climb that tree. I think as teachers, we've seen that picture before, and obviously the bird and the monkey have got the advantage here. They have those natural innate skills to do that, but that poor elephant, seal, frog, not going to make it too good. They're going to need extra supports. They're going to need more time to kind of figure it out, master skills, if they can even do it at all. And we have to think about that when we're assessing students on learning targets. So when we think about learning, we have to include the instructional cycle. We start teaching, and in that teaching, students are learning, and students learn skills to meet the standards that we've set per grade level, per course. However, we're setting those learning targets against state and district standards, but they're doing that learning process. They're using the material, they're practicing with it, and hopefully they're seeing it between 7 and 24 times, and that's the average mastery in that. As we're going through that learning process, we want to do that formative assessment where we can check on students' comprehension or skills to start to show progress in meeting those standards that we've set. At the end of a learning cycle, when we're kind of wrapping up that teaching, we want to look at a summative assessment where we want to see if the student is meeting that goal or not. When we're grading that assessment, we're indicating the assessment standard if it's met or if it's not met. If it's not met, we have to look back into that teaching again. We want to identify where the gaps are in the learning, and then we want to have the students complete tasks to learn that skill. And some students might be ready to go on, and others might need more time with the material, and that's what we need to figure out, like, how do we base our teaching to meet the needs of these gaps? And what is our school going to do for those interventions for students that aren't meeting those, that have those gaps? So when we think about using that instructional cycles, we really want to think about types of assessment. There's pre-assessment, formative assessment, and summative assessment. Pre-assessments have a purpose to determine students' understanding of the learning targets prior to instruction in the classroom. So we want to see what part of that standard, if any part of that standard, our students have prior to instruction. It also sparks some of that background knowledge and connections to what we are going to be teaching. How can we use them? We can analyze prior knowledge to determine best how to plan that instruction for student success and learning targets. Some examples of pre-assessment would be KWL charts. What do we know? What do we want to know? What do we learn? So what do we already know is that pre-assessment. A carousel brainstorm. Students, we can go around the room and talk about connections or prior connections to a learning target or a topic that we're going to introduce. Concept maps can be offshoots of a main idea or learning target. And then there's a process called Four Corners Inquiry, where if it's like a debated topic, the students can go in a corner that strongly agrees, a corner that agrees, a corner that disagrees, or a corner that strongly disagrees. So as we're going through different topics, we can have these pre-assessments, not just paper and pencil, but they can be active. They can be an activity. They can include movement for all learners. Obviously, there's many more pre-assessment types to assessments. These are just 4 that I tend to use. When we're thinking about formative assessments, we're really thinking about informal and formal formatives. Informal is more of that just ask and grab. Formal assessments are actually placed in the lesson plan and documented. We want to know that formative assessments inform is where information is gathered frequently and reported for using in development of knowledge and skills. Now, that's one thing to keep track of that some teachers don't do is that reporting out phase. Reporting out who's got this, who doesn't have it in that formative. And it doesn't mean we're reporting out to parents, but that we're documenting where somebody might be struggling, where they might need to be pulled in for an extra reteach or intervention. Formative assessments provide teachers with understandings of where students are in the progression of the learning target. So it gives us, that idea of where they are to meet that learning target. Formative assessments provide students with feedback about where they are in the progression of the learning target. And Marzano, in his book uh, about feedback, or actually in Brookhart's book, How to Give Effective Feedback to Your Students, it's really important that that feedback is planned. It's not just a check mark. You want to explain what the students' strengths are, what they are understanding, and then connect to where some of those gaps are, and then bring it back to how are we going to fill those gaps to get to that target. Marzano really says that feedback is one of the number one ways to improve student learning. So providing opportunities for effective feedback is very important. Formative assessments also allow for reflective lesson planning as a teacher. 3 are examples of formative assessments. Fingers up, 1 through 5. 1 is I don't get this at all. All the way to 5, I've got this and I've got it mastered. I can do this on my own. So it just gives teachers a quick glimpse of around the room of where students are at. Individual dry erase boards, students can ask questions or teachers can ask questions and students can write on the erase boards and just flash their answers. And it gives teachers a quick snapshot of who's understanding and making progress toward their learning target. Exit tickets are on the way out the door. You can ensure that students understood the lesson being taught that day and the learning objective. Math discourse. I've worked in illustrative math, and it's actually a great way. The illustrative math curriculum itself has math discourse topics where it's actually interesting because nobody's wrong. They just have to prove what they know. Why is something different? And it actually turns out that all of the things are different, just in a different way. So the ability to talk about a topic and share your learning is a great way of formative assessment. Think, pair, share, consensograms, color carousels, gallery walks with student feedback. So in gallery walks with student feedback, it's great to teach students how to give effective feedback also, because if they can give effective feedback about the learning target, you can, as a teacher, see that they're understanding what the learning target is. Lastly, there's summative assessments. Summative assessments inform, gather, and report for use in judging the outcomes of students and understanding of the learning targets, according to Marzano. Now, judging and reporting out, again, those are the end of the unit tests that we're actually putting into the grade book. Semester exams, like larger projects at the end of a unit. So it's judging that final outcome of a unit. One thing that Marzano says or Rick Wormelli says that is extremely interesting to me and a new concept to me is the idea of if a summative didn't turn out well, turn it into a formative. do an intervention, give some more time with that topic, fill that gap, and then give a summative. It really improves student outcomes to know that that's not that final chance, that summative wasn't the end all in it. And it's better idea than I considered a redo of an assessment. At the end of the process, summatives are done at the end of a process or when a product is complete. It can be presented as a grade mark or rank. Again, some schools grade as far as letter grades, A, B, C, D, F. Others are advanced, proficient, basic, below basic. So it all depends, but that summative assessment gives you that ranking. Summative assessments allow teachers to learn students' mastery level of the learning target, and they also can demonstrate some gaps in learning, which may need to be filled prior to moving ahead. Some types of summative assessments. There's obtrusive summatives, which are the typical tests we tend to see in school as far as paper pencil tests. They can be the fill in the blank, multiple choice, true, false, alternative choice, matching, short answer. These can be done paper pencil or they can be done online, but either way, they have these typical type of questions. Now, when we're thinking about types of summative, very often that's what teachers give. However, incorporating the two other types of summatives would be beneficial for students in the classroom. Now, there's obtrusive summatives. Those are not a direct paper and pencil test, but noticing that the student can demonstrate the learning target. Examples would be noticing that a student's using a recently taught note-taking skill during a guest speaker presentation. If that note-taking skill was one of the learning targets and they're doing it at another time, they've mastered that they can meet that learning target, so score it. When students are performing a lab in science, note who's using the lab equipment appropriately. It's one of the science standards that students are using lab equipment safely and appropriately for measurement or for skills. You can score that during the lab, not just its own safety lesson. When students can add mixed numbers before using a tape measure. Quite interestingly, my nephew, 9-year-old nephew, was working on mixed numbers this last spring during COVID. And when he was presented with the number forms of mixed numbers that had unlike denominators, he would get frustrated by seeing the addition or subtraction problem with the mixed numbers and immediately shut down. But I took him out to do some measuring in the garage or some woodworking in the garage, and he could figure out mixed numbers before he could use a tape measure because he saw fractions as a tape measure, the little nicks and crannies. So my sister-in-law and I got in touch with his teacher, and we set up a assessment set up like it would be for tape measuring. If you have a board this long and need to cut this much off, how much is going to be left over? And he proved that he can add and subtract mixed numbers. It's a really kind of cool way. And then she went back in and did some more personal lessons to him on showing him the math behind what he was doing in his head. It was really kind of cool. Another type of summative assessment to try to look forward to or get engaged in is student-generated summatives. For example, if an elementary language arts lesson is working on the story elements, the 5 story elements, and a teacher or a student scored 2.0, that student can generate their own assessment to raise that grade. They could say, I've scored 2.0 on the learning goal about literary elements, and I want to move up that score. I think if I select a story we've read and show how changing one element would influence another, maybe I could explain how changing just one character trait could influence the story's message, or how changing the setting could influence the plot. By showing how all the elements work together, I can prove that I really understand that learning the literacy elements, and maybe I could get a better grade. Allowing students to come up with this is going to take some time. It's going to take getting past some vulnerability because a lot of kids in our classrooms are used to being told what to do. So giving them that permission to come up with their own proof of understanding and what they really know. Um, when we are looking ahead, some things we need to consider. End of the year targets should be in place and aligned to state and district standards, which we have currently done last year, but we want to just make sure that we revisit those and understand them. We want our unit targets to be placed and posted, and our daily learning targets should be in a place where students can see and use them. Our curriculum or our grading student-friendly grading team is deciding with surveys and staff and stakeholder input how to present the grades that meet the learning target, whether it's a grade equivalency, percent equivalency, advanced, proficient, basic or below basic, or a number system. We have to ensure that our teachers and students know how to do that so that they can be effective on the grading process. Again, we talked when we were talking about student-friendly grading, we want students to focus on learning, not on acquiring a grade or earning a grade. And as a school, we really want to decide what gets graded for reporting. Do we want homework graded? Do we want formatives in the graded category? Or do we just want those to be feedback categories and really look at summatives? So some of those conversations are going to be had. In order to do that, we really want to have some groups focused on some studies. In Emily Rinkema and Stan Williams' book, The Standards-Based Classroom, in chapters 5 through 6, it really goes through summative, formative, and summative types of assessments and different types of assessments that can be graded in these different ways. And it has rubrics and other things to go through and strategies for interventions. Marzano has formative assessment and standards-based grading. There's chapters to go through in here, especially chapters, the formative and the student-generated assessments. That's where some of that information comes from. And then actually, when we're looking at assessments, one of the things that we really want to improve on is effective feedback to students. And student Susan Brookhart has a book called How to Give Effective Student Feedback to Your Students. And we'd really want groups to dig into this and then be able to share out and be able to implement strategies for others to visit classrooms and go see how some of those strategies are done. Our instructional coaches will be familiar with this material so that they can jump in and provide support where needed. And we'll ask that that each teacher has at least one coaching experience on one of these 3 topics throughout the next year. We want to make sure that our current curriculum and learning objective and progression targets have these rubrics so that they understand the feedback and the grading to the standards. We want to ensure that staff understands how to use those rubrics with effective feedback. We want to introduce the standards-based grading to families and how to use the feedback from formative assessments and summative assessments, or if we're turning summatives into formatives and giving students interventions. We need to know that our parents and families and students know how to use those opportunities to learn. We want to ensure students are, again, aware of our learning targets and model of grading. We can use our PLC and PD days to do data digs, which can drive our progress in instructing to the standards, but then continuing to look at our assessments, our formative and summative and our pre-assessments, to make sure that they align with what we are working on. And we also want to allow time for teachers to collaborate on lessons and assessments that have helped students achieve these targets. So these are where we would like to go as we are already making progress in our PLCs and our data, just looking ahead and how to improve student learning. Here are some of the resources that I used for this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to call or email. Thank you.